Hello everyone, and welcome to today's discussion of the brain. This week we have been learning about the central nervous system and its functions that allow our bodies to do all of the amazing things they do. During this lecture, we will briefly go over the major regions of the brain and the functions that these regions are responsible for. This will only be an overview and will not go too in-depth on the capabilities and specifics of each region. So if you're ready, let's dive into the fascinating concept of the brain. There are four major regions of the brain which we will be talking about today. These are the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the diencephalon. Each region can be divided into what you could call subregions that are all responsible for different actions in the body. We will begin with an overview of the cerebrum. When looking at a picture of the brain, you can identify the cerebrum by its folds and crevices. It is divided into left and right hemispheres that are connected by a thick band known as the corpus callosum. This band consists of an estimated 300 million neuronal axons that allow for communication between the hemispheres, therefore giving it the nickname of the body's information superhighway. Each hemisphere is composed of gray matter, also known as the cerebral cortex, and white matter. The cerebral cortex is divided into four lobes: frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital. Each of these lobes is responsible for different functions of the body. The frontal lobes, located toward the front of the head, are responsible for three main functions: speaking ability, voluntary motor activity, and elaboration of thought. It is also the area of the brain responsible for sensation and development of emotions and expression of an individual's personality. The temporal lobes, located at the sides of an individual's head, are the hearing components of the brain. They receive auditory sensations. They also play a role in the processes of memory, understanding, and language. The parietal lobes are located to the rear of the central sulcus, which is a deep enfolding that separates the frontal and parietal lobes and runs almost down the middle of the sides of each hemisphere. The primary roles of the parietal lobes are receiving and processing of sensory input. They also process information that pertain to mathematics skills and spelling abilities. The occipital lobes, located at the back of the head, carry out the initial processing of visual input. In summarization, the functions of the cerebrum include the following: voluntary control of movements, sensory perception, personality traits, language, and sophisticated mental events which include thinking, decision-making, memory, self-consciousness, and creativity. The next major region to discuss is the cerebellum, indicated by the orange structure in the picture. It lies just beneath the occipital lobes and is attached to the back of the upper brainstem. The main functions of this region are the maintenance of balance, coordination, planning of skilled voluntary muscle activity, and enhancement of muscle tone. So, what can happen if this portion of the brain is damaged? Dysfunction of the cerebellum has been connected to several developmental disorders to include ADHD, autism, and developmental dyslexia. If this region of the brain experiences damage during the earlier stages of development, there can be long-term effects on the individual's movement and cognition. Studies have shown that damage on the right side of the cerebellum is typically associated with poorer language outcomes, and left side damage leads to poorer visuospatial performance. It was also determined that damages that occurred in the earlier stages of development more often were associated with poorer outcomes than damages that occurred during adulthood. This therefore indicated that the cerebellum plays a particularly important role during an individual's development. Let's move on to our third region of the brain, the brainstem. The brainstem serves as the vital link that allows for the connection and communication between the spinal cord and the higher areas of the brain. All of the fibers responsible for incoming information and outgoing information passes through this structure. The brainstem can be broken down into three sections: the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. The brainstem is responsible for numerous functions vital for the continuation of life. It is the origin of the majority of the cranial nerves. These nerve supplies relay information to and from the higher portions of the brain to allow for such functions as hearing, sight, eye movement, salivation, chewing, swallowing, your sense of taste and smell, equilibrium, and the abilities to feel sensation in your face and scalp, as well as the ability to make different facial expressions. The brainstem also houses the centers of the brain that control the cardiovascular, respiratory, and digestive systems. It also aids in the regulation of muscle reflexes that are involved in posture and equilibrium. The brainstem receives and integrates all of the sensory inputs from the body in a section known as the reticular formation. When these signals are received, the reticular formation carries these signals upward to arouse and actually activate the cerebral cortex. Finally, the brainstem, as well as the hypothalamus, houses the centers of the brain that control the sleep-wake cycle. Our final region of the brain to discuss is the diencephalon. There are two major components of the diencephalon that we will briefly discuss, which are the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Although the basal nuclei are not part of the diencephalon, we will discuss their functions in this section. The basal nuclei, as presented in the picture as the yellow structures, control the coordination of slow movements, especially those related to posture, play a role in the inhibition of muscle tone, and suppress the input of useless patterns of movement. The thalamus, depicted as the orange section, has several functions. It plays a role in motor control, is considered the relay station for all synaptic input, is responsible for some degree of consciousness, and it is capable of crude awareness of various sensations, although it cannot distinguish the location or the intensity. Finally, the hypothalamus, which we can see a portion of being presented as the green structures located at the bottom of the brain in the picture. The hypothalamus is responsible for the regulation of many homeostatic functions, including thirst, temperature control, urine output, and food intake. It plays a role in the sleep-wake cycle and is extensively involved with basic behavioral patterns and emotions. The hypothalamus also serves as a link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. This concludes our overview of the major regions of the brain and their functions. We covered a lot of material in a very brief manner in a short amount of time. Do not let that overwhelm you. This video is simply to introduce you to the regions of the brain and guide you through your studies as you learn about each in more depth. You could compare it to dipping your toes in the water before you dive into the pool. I hope you enjoyed your time here today, and I wish you good luck in your studies. Thank you for joining me, and have a great rest of your day.